We begin this morning with new reporting about another instance of former President Donald Trump pressuring local officials to overturn the 2020 election results. The Detroit News revealing there is an audio recording of then President Donald Trump and RNC Chair Ronna McDaniel talking to two Republican members of the Wayne County Board of Canvassers in November 2020, pressuring them not to certify the results. And according to the paper, telling them, quote, "We've got to fight for our country." Joining us now, NBC's Ken Dilanian and former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance. So, Ken, we should note the Detroit News says this recording was made by someone present for the conversation, but obtained through an intermediary who was not there. NBC News has not heard or verified the recordings. We've also reached out to spokespeople for former President Trump and McDaniel. What have we heard, Ken, so far from them, and what can you tell us about this conversation?
Well, Jose, they're not denying the substance of the reporting here. And in fact, what the Trump campaign is saying is that then President Trump at the time was acting as the president of the United States, concerned about fraud in the election. But it's not clear that the reporting about what this tape suggests backs that up, because what happened here, if you recall, is that Joe Biden won this county by more than 150,000 votes. And there was a pro forma vote by the Wayne County Board of Canvassers to certify those results, and two Republicans balked. And they ended up voting for it, but then they were having second thoughts. And this is when, according to this reporting, Donald Trump and Ronna McDaniel, chairwoman of the RNC, called these two holdouts and urged them to stand fast. And Ronna McDaniel even said that they would provide them lawyers. Now, in the end, they caved, and it went on, and the votes were certified. But had that been held up, that would have been another example of the system grinding to a halt, where there was really no evidence, no credible evidence of fraud. And this could end up being important evidence, Jose, in Jack Smith's federal election prosecution of Mr. Trump.
And this is, Ken, information that apparently Smith did not have access to until now.
I think that's not clear. We should always be very cautious about what we think the special counsel does and doesn't have with his vast subpoena power and with the FBI at his disposal. But whether he has it or not, he has it now, and it's very important evidence.
Yeah, and Joyce, this is just the latest phone call we know about where Trump directly involved in efforts to overturn the election. What stands out to you about this reporting?
So I think one of the intriguing facts here, which is very useful to prosecutors, is the fact that here we have the sitting president of the United States making a phone call to two county people who are involved in certifying the election in Wayne County in Michigan. You know, that's a pretty remarkable level of engagement for Donald Trump. And it's good evidence for prosecutors to show how in the loop he was on the details, how engaged he was in the plan to interfere with certifying the election results for Joe Biden.
And part of that conversation included McDaniel saying, if you can go home tonight, do not sign it. We will get you attorneys, with Trump adding, we'll take care of it. How significant is that promise, Joyce?
It could be very significant. Michigan has a bribery statute, a bribery crime that tracks the federal statute. And in essence, it makes it a crime to offer something of value. A lawyer's services are valuable in exchange for taking or withholding official action, here failing to certify the vote. So we don't know how or which set of prosecutors are looking at this. It's possible that Michigan prosecutors could be taking a fresh look in light of this evidence, but it could be quite dangerous for any of the people involved.
And Ken, there are so many similarities with what happened in the Georgia case. They're two now different cases, but there are similarities here.
Absolutely, Jose. It's a clear pattern. And as Joyce said, then President Trump was calling local officials. And as the president of the United States, he had no role in state and local elections. If he was concerned about fraud, his modus operandi should have been to talk to the Justice Department, which in fact he did, and they told him there was no fraud. So his claim that he was acting as the president by calling these state and local officials and pressuring them is suspect, frankly.
Yeah, and now kind of focusing on another legal issue, a source with knowledge of the Trump team's plans, telling NBC News they will appeal the decision to keep Trump off Colorado's ballot. Walk us through, Ken, the Trump timeline.
Yeah, well, they're absolutely going to appeal this, and they expect that the Supreme Court will take it up quickly. It is stayed unless and until the Supreme Court intervenes, which will be interesting once it gets to if they don't intervene before January 5th, when they have to start thinking about printing the ballots. That's going to cause a problem in Colorado. But it seems fairly likely that the Supreme Court would get involved here, because here we have a constitutional issue where state courts have come down on different sides of the question. It's a classic example of where the Supreme Court needs to weigh in, Jose, on this question of whether Donald Trump was an insurrectionist and therefore cannot be on the ballot in the next presidential election.
And so, Joyce, explain to us what effect or not stayed, that it's fact that it stayed until there is some future. What does that mean, and what does that in actuality mean?
Yeah, stays are always very difficult to understand and how they apply to these different legal proceedings. Here, the Colorado court has ruled that Trump cannot be on Colorado's ballots in 2024. But then they stayed their order. That means it won't take effect for a period of time. And here's what we need to know going forward. As of now, even though they've ruled Trump can't be on the ballot, he is on the ballot in Colorado. That could change if one of two things happens. If the United States Supreme Court does not agree to hear this case, then the Colorado Supreme Court's order will stand and Trump will be off of the ballot. I agree with Ken, though, that the Supreme Court is very likely to hear this matter. And if that's in fact the case, then the ultimate outcome, whether Trump will be on the ballot, will depend upon the Supreme Court's ruling in this case, which could come quickly or it could come slowly. For practical purposes, Trump may remain on the ballot for the primaries, and it may be that the fight is over whether he's on the ballot for the general election.